Welcome to the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt, September 15th, 2022, getting closer and closer to Pitt's game, first road game of the season, on Saturday when the Panthers go to Kalamazoo to take on Western Michigan in prime time. We'll have plenty of coverage of that game on Panther-Lair.com, and, obviously throughout the day today and through tomorrow and into Saturday, we'll have lots to talk about there. But today we're going to take a brief sidetrack, just ever so briefly, into recruiting. We're going to talk a little bit of Florida recruiting. We've got Rivals.com national analyst Ryan Wright, who covers the Southeast. That's Florida, Georgia, Alabama. He's going to join us to talk a little bit about some of Pitt's commitments from the state of Florida. You know, Florida's been a primary focus for Pitt over the years. It's been, dating back to the Walt Harris years. Dave Wanstead recruited Florida heavily. Pat Narduzzi has picked that up as well. By last count, Pitt has, or at least by my count, quickly running through the roster, 12 players on this year's roster from the state of Florida. 4 of those guys are starters: Deslin Alexandra, Marquez Williams, Kalijah Cansey, Brandon Hill. 3 more are on the 2-deep: Daniel Carter and both 22s, Vincent Davis and PJ O'Brien. And then a few more guys kind of fill out that group. But 12 players on the roster from the state of Florida. That ties Florida with Ohio for third most of any state. There are, according to Pitt's official roster, more than 30 players from the state of Pennsylvania on this year's roster, scholarship and walk-on, 13 players from the state of New Jersey, and then 12 each from Ohio and Florida. So it's still a prominent source of talent and personnel and roster building for the Pitt coaches. The state of Florida is. In the current recruiting class, 6 players are committed to Pitt from the state of Florida, and of course there's a heavy pursuit being made for one of the top players in the state, 5-star wide receiver Hakeem Williams. We're definitely going to talk to Ryan about that. I talked on yesterday's Morning Pitt about some of the receiver talent who was at the game on Saturday, the game against Tennessee at Acrisure Stadium. The wide receivers, and really put a lot of credit. I talked about that in the context of Taekwon Underwood and the impact that he has made on Pitt's recruiting efforts. Top 4-star wide receiver in the class of 2025, Marcus Harris from California, was in town. 5-star wide receiver Ryan Wingo from St. Louis was in town. And then most prominently, most notably, most pressingly, 5-star wide receiver Hykeem Williams from Florida was in town in the class of 2023. And so with so many kids from Florida committed in the class, like I said, 6 commitments from the state of Florida in the class of 2023 for Pitt so far, and then a really big one looming out there with Hykeem Williams. And wouldn't be surprised if they find a way to sneak another Florida guy into the class before it's all over. I decided we got to get Ryan on here to talk a little bit about Florida recruiting, and particularly about some of Pitt's commitments. We didn't get a chance to talk about all 6 of them from the state of Florida, but we talked about 4 that I think are most interesting to me. 3 defensive backs and a running back. Shadarian Harrison from Lakeland. Or actually, I should say 2 defensive backs, 1 wide receiver and 1 running back. Shadarian Harrison from Lakeland and Jesse Anderson from Cardinal Gibbons are both defensive backs. Lamar Seymour is a wide receiver from Miami Central, and Montravius Lloyd is a running back / all-purpose back / slot back / slot receiver from Lakewood on the Gulf Coast. And those guys are really interesting to me. I think on the weekend recaps that we did on Monday mornings throughout the summer, we talked a lot about those players when they were taking their official visits and after they committed. We talked about those guys and what they meant and how they look and how they fit in for Pitt. But I wanted to get Ryan on because he's had firsthand experience with these guys. He's seen them up close and personal. Just saw Shadarian Harrison over the weekend, so he has some great insight on him and how he projects at the next level. And then I wanted to get Ryan's take on Hakeem Williams, because Ryan has probably talked to Hakeem more than anybody else. At least as far as I know, he's got as much of a line on the 5-star wide receiver as anyone does. He's talked to him multiple times and has some pretty good insight. So I wanted to welcome Ryan to the show to talk, like I say, about those Pitt commitments, Hykeem Williams, and in general Pitt's efforts recruiting in Florida and the job that Taekwon Underwood has done. So I'm really excited to welcome in Rivals.com national analyst covering the Southeast, Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, Ryan Wright. And Ryan, thanks a lot for joining the show. We really appreciate it. Obviously, Florida, Georgia, the whole Southeast is a prime recruiting territory for Pitt. Panthers have 6 commitments in the class of 2023 from the state of Florida so far, and they're working very hard on another guy. We'll talk about him in a minute. I wanted to catch up with you about a few of these guys who are committed to Pitt out of the state of Florida. And I wanted to start with Shadarian Harrison out of Lakeland. He's an interesting guy because he was sort of a not an unknown name when he ended up on Pitt's official visit in June, and he ended up committing, and we didn't really know much about him. But you were telling me you just got a chance to see Shadarian live in person. What stood out to you as you watched him over the weekend?
He made a lot of plays that stood out. So playmaker one. He's got great size. That's another thing, especially for a corner. So if I remember correctly, he had an interception. I think he recovered a botched punt in the end zone for a touchdown, made some tackles. So he was all over the field. But I was really impressed with him, with his size, his speed, being a big corner. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays in the ACC. Certainly has that body if he's up for it to be a safety. I think he would be devastating. Like, I think he would really thrive as a safety, but he's definitely a good corner, has cover skills, all that. So I like what Pitt's getting there, and he is a little low on the rankings, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him move up as well. So can't guarantee anything, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Sure. Well, you would probably know better than you might have inside info or sources there. But is he, can you tell us about his area, like playing at Lakeland? I mean, is he maybe a little under the radar because of where he plays? I mean, it's not, the heart of Miami-Dade County or anything like that. I mean, what is he maybe a little bit buried where he plays high school?
There's a yes and a no to that. Now that he's at Lakeland, I don't think that he will be as buried, because he was at Kathleen last year. And so didn't get a chance to see him last year. Now he's at Lakeland. The one thing that kind of bodes really well for him, depending how they're using Kermani in practice. So they have 5-star Kermani McLean, who's a corner, but he also plays receiver. They have a 4-star Tyler Williams, who is really, really good. I mean, there could be an argument made, borderline 5-star kind of talent. So just those 2 guys alone, there's others on the team, but there's going to be a lot of attention brought to that program. And the one thing that also bodes well for Pitt, circling back around, is he's going up against those guys in practice. So there's not going to be that shock and awe when he gets to the collegiate level going up against, other big time players, because he will have seen it in practice. But back to your question on this one, I do think that he's a little buried, and I do think that there's going to be more exposure coming his way.
That means the next 3 months will be interesting to watch his recruitment as that film starts to spread. And we all know, I feel like, particularly with kids from Florida, it's never over until it's over. You kind of gotta get that paper signed before you can really count him in the books. Does he play both ways for Lakeland? Is he lining up on offense or just defense?
No, he just played defense. But for the faint of heart, for the Pitt fans, he had a Pitt towel on his back. So for what that's worth, add a little there. He was repping Pitt. So all's good. And I am supposed to talk to him hopefully today and get another update in with him. So stay tuned, more to come.
Great. Out in, I guess, St. Petersburg area, Gulf Coast area, is Montrevious Lloyd, running back, committed to Pitt as a running back at Lakewood High School. And he's interesting because, we were kind of marveling at his stats from his first few games. He really didn't have a whole lot of carries. He was just catching the ball, and then you watch his film, he's returning kicks, he's lining up in the slot. Even when he's in the backfield, he's going out and catching passes. What do you see from Montrevious Lloyd, in his film, as someone who can make plays with the ball in his hands, and then his potential as a running back at the next level?
Yeah, that's something that's really interesting, because to what you said, he had a really solid junior year. He had over 600 yards rushing, 11 scores, was pretty explosive with his yard per carry average. I think he was pretty close to 6 on that. But then he also contributed in the pass game last year, 10, 11 receptions, like 150 yards, another score. And then I have watched his film, like you said, everything's a slot inside receiver. So I don't know how Pitt may want to utilize his skills, if that's something that he's kind of ramping up for the next level. I know, you said they brought him on as a running back. So maybe it keeps some tread on the tires, doesn't wear him down so much as a running back when he gets there. But it does bring another dimension to what he can do on the field at the collegiate level, almost like an Anina Smith for A&M might be kind of a fair comparison with what they might be able to do with him at Pitt, depending how creative they want to be with his skills. But yeah, I was really surprised to see the stats, like you said, low carry numbers, lots of receptions, and they really are targeting him in the offensive attack. So he is expanding his overall skills.
Sure. I mean, I think as offenses continue to evolve, I mean, running backs have to be able to do that more and more. They're being counted on to catch and line up in the slot or line up out wide. How much, as analysts, as you guys evaluate running backs, are you now looking at that too, or are you putting more weight on what can this guy also do in the passing game?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of twofold. There's some dynamic guys like a Ruben Owens, for example, or whatever, that can kind of seemingly do it all, that all-purpose back. Then you kind of have the scat backs that are also kind of in that same mold, maybe can light up in the slot and all that. So you do have to take everything that they can do on the field into consideration with a ranking. It's just, I mean, the more versatile somebody is, and or the more dominating they are at their position, those are the things that you really want to look at. So if you have a power runner, somebody like a Justice Hayes or Richard Young, that they're good at what they do, but then you also have the guys like we were talking about here with Lloyd, that is multidimensional and can bring different facets to the game as a skill player.
Sure. Getting over onto the, into the Miami area now at Miami Central is Lamar Seymour, wide receiver. We have him as a 3-star, but you watch his film and it's like, this guy looks like he's got a real high ceiling when he gets to college. What do you see out of Lamar Seymour as you kind of break him down?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So I've seen him. I saw him twice last year. Got to see him play against Bishop Gorman in the state championship game. And I got to see him this year against IMG. And you watch his film, he's explosive. But then you kind of look at his stats, and I think he only had 19 receptions last year. I think with the right amount of, I'd love to see what he could do with 40 receptions in a year, right? I mean, I think the point you're kind of making, and I agree with you, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but he's an 800 to 1,000 yard receiver in a season if given that opportunity. And I see that as well. But it's also that thing with potential versus what the production, right? So there's a lot of guys that may look the part, but then you also kind of going back to what you're talking about, the last question with the versatility in production and stuff like that, is putting it down. One thing that will hopefully change in his favor is Trader is no longer on the roster, 5-star 2024 kid. So he hopefully will get more targets, more opportunities to really showcase what he can do. But the one thing that really sets him apart, and again, I think you kind of alluded to it in your opening, is his speed. You give him the ball and there's the burst and what he can do with the ball. He just has to get those touches, those targets, so that we can see just how explosive he is, because kind of we're seeing it in pockets, right? But again, at the collegiate level, I think hopefully for Pitt that we really can see him come into his own and like, oh wow, this, everybody's going to be wondering, where did this guy come from? And those of us that have been watching him know, like, we've seen it. We've just been waiting for him to be able to do it and get those opportunities.
Right. Yeah, he sort of feels, and this next guy that I'm going to ask you about, it sort of feels the same way to me, that he could be one of those guys that gets to college and, he goes to Pitt, or, sometimes these guys end up at West Virginia or any number of places. And you say, wow, how did the big three in Florida let them go? You know what I mean? Why isn't he at Miami? Why isn't he at Florida State? And I kind of think we might end up saying the same thing about Jesse Anderson from Cardinal Gibbons. He's a guy that's going to Pitt. They recruited him as a defensive back. A lot of his film is at receiver. And he seems to make a lot of plays. I mean, what do you see in Jesse Anderson's film and how it might translate offense to defense if that's where he ends up playing in college?
Yeah, it's kind of tough because I'm with you. I've seen more of him on offense. And one thing with that, Cardinal Gibbons does a really good job. I think that they have 18 different guys that have caught a pass, which is great for like trying to keep defenses honest. Horrible for guys trying to get individual stats. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Seymour there. But so he hasn't done a whole lot this year so far. Anderson hasn't. One of the undervalued things, and I know he's not going as a receiver, but his toughness. And I think that could translate as a DB. I mean, he's willing to go across the middle, take the big hits, hold on to the ball, concentrate, all of that stuff. That's the mental toughness and physical toughness that he brings to the field. DB is tough because you're doing everything backwards. So I'd like to see more of him doing that before, really commenting. But I mean, he's a good athlete. Um, I would really be interested to see just that speed, that quickness in the back pedal. He obviously has good hips as a receiver, running routes and that burst. So a lot of those skills will translate. But it is really hard to be a good cover corner outside of just being athletic, because it's the route recognition, the headiness. Being a receiver, he should know what's coming. So some of that stuff could be very intuitive, but it's still the repetition of seeing that a couple million times where it's coming, and that translates into being a smart player and being able to use the athleticism to make the plays.
Right. I mean, to your point about toughness, I think the first clip on his one highlight, he catches a pass and gets his helmet knocked off and pops right back up and doesn't seem fazed by it at all. He's jumping right into it. But kind of to your point about, only playing on one side. I mean, a school like Cardinal Gibbons usually has the depth that guys don't have to play Ironman football. They don't have to go back and forth. And so it makes it tough if you're projecting a guy to a different position. Certainly at Stranahan High School, they're not playing guys two ways, or at least they're not with Hykeem Williams, a 5-star wide receiver. That was my segue into Hykeem, because I can't let you go without asking about him. You've talked to Hykeem a ton of times, 5-star receiver. All the Pitt fans know who he is. I don't think I need much of a preamble on this, but you've been in contact with him a lot. Obviously he was at Pitt this past weekend. He was, the LSU Florida State game 2 weeks ago. What's kind of the latest with Hykeem? What's sort of your read on the situation? Our opinion, of course, is that we think Pitt's more in it than has been given credit. I think in a lot of outlets, I think you've done a good job of mentioning Pitt in those articles about Hykeem. But what is your take on his situation and maybe where he stands right now, a couple weeks before, or 9 days or 10 days before his commitment?
Yeah. So, man, it's really tough. But as you mentioned, Pitt has always been in it. He's been consistent. Receiver Coach Wood has a great relationship with him and has kept Pitt in the running for that. And I do believe that's sincere when Hykeem talks about Pitt, that love is there. So I would put them in the top three. Back in the spring, I think A&M was probably a leader. And had he had it to want to commit then, I think that A&M would have gained his verbal commitment, but he's held off. I do think Florida State has closed the gap quite a bit here in the last couple months, but Florida State has been consistent in his recruiting as well. So it's not like there's somebody new coming out of nowhere, but those three schools look very probable. And I think it's going to kind of come down to if he wants to stay in state, be a little bit closer for his family and friends to come see him play. And then there's always that thing that we don't know about. And I'm not suggesting that this is about him, but the NIL deals, right? And so the relationships are important. The development is important, the opportunity to succeed, get targets. And a guy like Hakeem is destined for the NFL, given the right opportunities to show what he can do. Because he has all the attributes. So I think all three schools can set him up for that. It's just what we don't know, what may be that difference maker is a NIL deal behind the scenes where it can make fools of us all. Like, yes, he's for sure going to this school. And then, you find out a year later or something like that a last minute NIL deal, kind of helps sway him in a different way, which I have no problem with. But, for us trying to guess or make heads or tails of what's going on, it will be made fools of for sure.
Right. No question. And I'll say it, you don't have to say it. I'll say it that I think Florida State is the in-state option. Pitt is where he's got the strong relationship, and Texas A&M is the NIL wildcard. You don't have to say that. I'll be the one that says it. He's got this commitment plan. I think it's September 23rd. Is that the date that he's talking about? Okay. Do you see any way, I mean, regardless of who he picks that day, the Florida State and A&M visits, official visits for later in the fall or the early winter, those are still happening, right? Do you see any way that he commits on that day and then doesn't take those visits, or only takes a visit to the school he commits to if it ends up being Florida State or A&M?
Again, so everything going down to the wire until the pin is on the national letter of intent, right? I mean, and even then on the different message boards, people take recruiting news that may not go their way very personally, and it's not meant to troll or anything. But one of the things that I really think is important that segues into this, and I wouldn't suggest that Hakeem is a transfer portal guy. I think wherever he goes, that again, he'll get those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a longer end game now because of the transfer portal, where a relationship that is ongoing in high school could pay dividends in a year or two, or whatever the case may be on down the line. And then, we still have always had grad transfers where, a guy may have gotten his degree in 3 years and wanted to play his last year at a different school for whatever reason. So I would think back to the question, and I'm really trying to think hardly about how I want to answer this. I would think that it would probably be in his best interest not to, if he commits to one of the schools that he's not going to take hadn't taken an official visit to yet, that he leaves the other one alone and goes to that one, if that's the case. Because I think it's only going to just stir everything back up, for him. So it's really up to him. I think, he's visited all these schools. He knows what to expect. Maybe he just wants that one last kind of go around to see, just in case. I'm sure the school that may lose out on his commitment will definitely try to get him there. So I guess we'll kind of have to wait and see, but I would think that it'd be in his best interest not to, if that's how everything works out, is just stay away from the official visits and let the commitment speak for itself.
Sure. And then the last thing, you mentioned Taekwon Underwood, Pitt's receivers coach, who came from Rutgers. I keep, every time I talk about Pitt and Hykeem Williams, just as a way to sort of emphasize the relationship there between Hykeem and Taekwon Underwood, is that Underwood had Hykeem seriously looking at Rutgers. And I always sort of laugh, like, if you can get him interested in Rutgers, there's obviously a strong connection. What, you've covered 5-star guys. You've covered a lot of 5-star guys. Pitt doesn't usually get that deep with them, or as deep as they are with Hykeem right now. What does that say about Taekwon Underwood, and what, impression have you gotten from Hykeem about that relationship with Taekwon Underwood in your time talking with him?
Yeah, I think it's a genuine bond, built on respect and how they're talking about things, just not with Hakeem, but just in general with different players, where if a coach is honest and straightforward with the player, even give them tips on the recruiting trail about other schools, maybe not like don't go there, but, kind of walking them through the process, almost like an uncle or a father figure, if you will, those bonds mean a lot, because there's a lot of different people coming at, especially 5-stars, wanting this, wanting that, promising this, promising that. And so I'm not suggesting that that's 100% that relationship with Coach Underwood and Hakeem, but it feels that way. And it's like a mentor, somebody that he can relate to, talk to, and open up with, and not feel judged, not feel pressured. That conversation is solely about recruiting. If it was, at one time with Rutgers or with Pitt, because I think he visited maybe 3 times with Rutgers when Coach Underwood was there. So it is a very, very strong relationship, and I do believe he likes Coach Underwood a lot.
All right, Ryan, great stuff. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Obviously, we'll all be keeping an eye in 8 or 9 days, however long it is, until the 23rd. See what Hykeem picks, but we'll definitely be checking back in with you throughout the fall about these Florida guys. Thanks for all your work on Rivals, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to Ryan Wright from Rivals.com for joining us to talk about some of Pitt's commitments. I'm really intrigued by these guys. You start with Shadarian Harrison, a big defensive back from Lakeland High School, and he was a guy, he visited, I think he was the first official visit weekend in June, and he was sort of I don't want to say a late ad. I think the Pitt coaches had him on board for a while as far as being on the official visit weekend, but he was a name we found out about late in the week, if you remember, leading into that visit weekend, and kind of just threw him on the official visit list, talked about him, gathered as much information as we could, but he was sort of unknown. We didn't really know who he was or a whole lot about him, and by the end of the weekend, he was committed. And he might be one of the most intriguing athletes in this class. There are a couple of guys, most of them happen to be from Florida, who I would say are some of the most intriguing athletes in this class. And Shadarian Harrison is up there. I think he's a big-time athlete. And I would say the same thing about Jesse Anderson, but Harrison maybe even a little bit more. I think, you heard Ryan say that he thinks Harrison will, find his way into a ratings bump. I think there's a good chance he's going to be a high 3-star with possibly on the cusp of 4-star status. I think he's that impressive of an athlete. And, at this point, I think we've all come to accept that this coaching staff can evaluate and develop defensive backs. I think they've done it time after time after time. I think, we can give them the benefit of the doubt when it comes to defensive backs. And so when you look at a guy like Shadarian Harrison, or you look at Jesse Anderson from Cardinal Gibbons, who we talked to Ryan about, you look at Bryce Pollock from Georgia, talking about the Southeast region and some of the athletes Pitt has been able to get out of that area. They're all really intriguing and I think high ceiling defensive back prospects. So even you look at Jesse Anderson playing at Cardinal Gibbons, where, as I said to Ryan, they have the depth. They don't need to play guys both ways. You can pretty much just be offense or just defense. And Jesse Anderson just playing offense there is excelling. I mean, he's doing great. He's you watch some of the highlight film, you say, boy, that's really impressive stuff. It looks like he could be a big time wide receiver. Pitt coaches like him at defensive back. He's comfortable playing that position, and even if he doesn't get a lot of time there. But you look at him just as an athlete. You look at the athletic profile of Shadarian Harrison. You look at the athletic profile of Jesse Anderson. You see some really high-level athletes who, they have all the tools that you want coming in. And then it's just a matter of bringing them in, coaching them up, developing them, and helping them become effective college football players, and in this case, defensive backs. I think both guys, along with Bryce Pollock, have the ability to play cornerback, or they can move to safety, which is a move that we've seen the Pitt coaches do a bunch of times. I think Jordan Whitehead was initially looked at as a corner. He ends up being an outstanding safety. Damar Hamlin was looked at as a corner. He ends up being an outstanding safety. Eric Hallett came in as a corner. Again, another outstanding safety. Khalil Anderson comes in as a cornerback. He hasn't seen much playing time, really hardly any playing time at all at safety, but I think he's got a very high ceiling. He's going to be in that competition with P.J. O'Brien next year, I think, for that starting field safety job, or possibly working at the boundary. I think they like to have those guys be interchangeable if they've got the talents to do so. And I think Anderson does. So overall, you look at, like I say, Shadarian Harrison and Jesse Anderson, both guys who could play corner or could play safety. And I think that makes them really intriguing and really good athletes. And I think you can see that on their film. And I think you could hear from Ryan how impressed he was with Shadarian Harrison when he saw him the other night. Montrevious Lloyd is one that I'm curious about, and I think you could kind of hear it in my questions to Ryan, and probably could hear it in Ryan's answers, that we're not really sure how he's going to project. Pitt coaches do like him as a running back, but he's getting most of his work, either in this lined up in the slot, or when he's lined up in the backfield, he's catching passes. And you watch a lot of his film, there's not a whole lot of handoffs and carries. He's doing his damage. He's getting his opportunities, mostly with passes being thrown to him. Now, that doesn't mean he can't be a running back, and I think the Pitt coaches do like him as a running back. But I think what it means is that it's going to be interesting to see how his game translates. Now, kind of the question that I asked to Ryan, you heard me there, that, with the way offenses are evolving, the running backs are catching more passes these days. How much does that weigh in the evaluation of a running back prospect? Can he function in the passing game? Can he be a pass catcher? And I think somebody like Lloyd is showing right now that he can. So as long as he's able to, excel at some of the other things like blitz pickup and seeing the hole when he takes a handoff, he's got this other element that he can add to it to be really dynamic and attack in a lot of different ways and be a real threat offensively. And then Lamar Seymour, I think, is maybe one of the, I was going to say under the radar or underrated guys in this class, but I think Shadarian Harrison or Jesse Anderson are both in that group as far as Pitt's recruiting class, and Seymour absolutely is too. I think Lamar Seymour could be one of the better receiver prospects in the state of Florida. It's just Florida is so loaded that a guy like him, who would be a top 3 wide receiver in a lot of other states, ends up not being ranked quite so high. He's playing in a school, like Ryan said, at Miami Central, where he's not going to get all the targets. He said he'd love to see him have a season where he gets 40 catches and see what kind of numbers that he could put up. Said he thinks he could be an 800 or 1,000-yard receiver. He just doesn't get as many opportunities because he's got a lot of good receivers on his team. So they spread the ball around. There are a lot of guys who are catching passes at Miami Central, which is not a knock on Lamar Seymour, shouldn't be held against Lamar Seymour, but it's going to affect his output and his production and his offensive numbers. But I think he's really, really good, and he's got a chance to, be one of the gems, I think, one of the underrated gems in this recruiting class. Of course, you would always like to have those properly rated gems like Hykeem Williams. And, as we talked with Ryan, this is going to be he's going to commit on September 23rd. Ryan kind of thinks that maybe Hykeem won't take additional official visits after he commits. I'm not really kind of buying that logic. I would sort of disagree with Ryan there. I think whether he commits to Pitt, Florida State, or Texas A&M on the 23rd, he's still going to take 2 official visits, one to Florida State and one to Texas A&M before signing day arrives. I think whoever he commits to is going to have a battle on their hands to try to hold on to him and keep him in the fold heading into signing day in December. I think Pitt's got a great chance. I don't know if they're the favorite. Florida State seems to be surging right now. Like I joked with Ryan, and I don't know how much I was joking, Texas A&M has the NIL element. And we know that's part of their recruiting strategy right now. Really, it's part of the recruiting process everywhere right now. Texas A&M is certainly using it pretty effectively. If you look at their recruiting classes that they're putting together. So you have those different elements, and it's reductive to say, but it's, do you want to stay in state and go to Florida State and be as close, as close to home as possible? Do you want to go to Pitt, where you've got this connection with Taekwon Underwood and you've built this relationship with Pat Narduzzi and you really like the city and all those things? Or do you want to go to Texas A&M, where probably the NIL deal is going to be the most? I think there will be NIL opportunities for Hykeem Williams at all 3 of these schools. And, I think if you're Pitt, your goal is just to, and I mean, this isn't necessarily something Pat Narduzzi is controlling because he can't, but if you are the people representing NIL interests at Pitt, your goal is to be as competitive in that realm with FSU and Texas A&M as possible, and then hope that you can be competitive enough that, the focus then turns back to that relationship with Taekwon Underwood. That it's not like, well, I've got this great relationship with Coach Underwood, but man, NIL, it's way off. It's way out of balance here, and it's got me looking at FSU and A&M. You've got to be competitive enough and close enough that it makes that relationship the primary deciding factor. I think that's Pitt's best hope, their best chance. As I said yesterday, it's about Taekwon Underwood and the job he has done recruiting Hykeem Williams. Listen, we release this Morning Pitt every morning, Monday through Friday, right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and set so you get an alert every time we release a new video every morning, Monday through Friday. And when we go live, as we did last night for the Panther-Lair show, 8:30 every Wednesday nights, and as we will do after the Western Michigan game on Saturday night. Might be a couple minutes after the game, might be 10 minutes, half hour after the game. I don't know an exact start time, but if you subscribe to the YouTube channel and you turn on notifications, you'll get an alert when we go live, so you'll know when to tune in and join the show and join the conversation. So like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting, and message boards where you can talk about it with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Go check it out. Thanks so much for tuning in this morning. We'll be back tomorrow with final thoughts on the Western Michigan game, some keys to the game, some key storylines to watch, who's going to play, who's not. We don't know. We'll see what we know by Friday morning on the Morning Pitt. So thanks for watching this one. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you on Friday morning with the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.